Have you ever felt that chill on the back of your neck, as if someone was watching you? That's how it all started for me, in that old house at the end of the street. I had just moved in, excited about the low rent. Little did I know the true cost I would be paying. The first night, the whispers started. They were so low that I thought it was just the wind. But as the days went by, they became clearer, more insistent. Muffled voices came from the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just my fertile imagination. But then, one dark and stormy night, something changed. The voices became louder, more desperate, and I finally understood what they were saying. "Help us. We're trapped. Please." My heart raced. I wanted to run away, but something was holding me there. I needed to find out the truth behind those whispers. And that's how I plunged into a nightmare from which I may never wake up. Determined to unravel the mystery, I began to investigate the history of the house. I discovered that it had belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century, the Blackwoods. But the lineage had ended abruptly after a series of mysterious deaths. Armed with a flashlight and courage I didn't know I possessed, I decided to explore the darkest corners of the house. In the attic, I found a dusty diary. The yellowed pages told a story of macabre experiments and dark pacts. The more I read, the more my blood ran cold. The Blackwoods had made a deal with forces beyond human comprehension, exchanging innocent souls for power and wealth. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud coming from downstairs. My heart almost stopped when I realized I was no longer alone in the house. With hesitant steps, I descended the creaking stairs. The darkness seemed to swallow up the light of my flashlight. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, as still as a statue. I gathered all my courage and approached. As the light touched the figure, I realized with horror that it wasn't a person, but something different, a mass of shadows that pulsed as if it were alive. The creature turned towards me, revealing red eyes that glowed with an ancient hunger. Its voice echoed in my mind, "Welcome, Blackwood heir. We've been waiting for you." At that moment, I realized that my move to this house was no accident. I had been lured here, part of a plan far greater and more terrible than I could have imagined. The creature led me to the basement, a place I didn't even know existed. There, I saw something that chilled my soul. A circle of black candles, strange symbols drawn on the floor, and, in the center, a stone altar stained red. "The ritual must be completed," whispered the creature. "One last soul to free the prisoners and seal the pact." I realized with horror that I was the last piece of the puzzle, the final sacrifice. The voices on the walls intensified, begging for release. In a flash of clarity, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could surrender and complete the cycle of horror, or fight against the fate that had been imposed on me. With a cry of defiance, I grabbed one of the candles and threw it at the creature. The flames spread quickly, consuming the shadows. The fire spread through the house with supernatural speed. The walls shook with the screams of trapped souls, finally finding a way out. I ran desperately, looking for a way to escape. The smoke made it difficult to breathe and see the way. When I finally reached the front door, I heard one last whisper, "Thank you. We're free." I staggered out, watching helplessly as the house was consumed by flames. Sirens sounded in the distance, but I barely heard them. My mind was focused on the revelations of that terrible night. Days later, among the rubble, they found the remains of dozens of bodies, some centuries old. The mystery of the Blackwoods finally came to light, but at a terrible cost. Today, years after that night, I still wake up startled, hearing whispers in the wind. I freed the souls trapped in that cursed house, but at what cost? Sometimes I wonder if I really escaped, or if I just exchanged one prison for another. For now, I know that there are horrors beyond human comprehension, waiting in the shadows. And once you see them, they never leave you alone again. I never believed in superstitions. Broken mirrors, black cats, none of that scared me, until I found that antique mirror in a thrift store. It was a beautiful piece, with an ornate frame in aged gold. The seller seemed eager to get rid of it, practically shoving the mirror in my hands. "It's yours at any price," he said, avoiding looking directly at the object. I should have seen the warning in his eyes, the tremor in his voice, but I was too excited about my discovery. I took the mirror home, proud of my new find. I hung it in the bedroom, admiring how it complemented the decor. It was that first night that things started to change. I woke up suddenly feeling watched. In the dark, I saw my reflection in the mirror, but something was wrong. The reflection smiled at me. I blinked, sure that it was just my sleepy imagination, but when I looked again, the reflection waved. My heart raced. I was paralyzed, unable to move as I watched my own reflection take on a life of its own. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it had just been a bad dream, but every time I passed the mirror, I felt a chill run down my spine. One night, plucking up courage, I decided to face it. I stared at my reflection, determined to prove to myself that there was nothing wrong. And then I saw it. Behind my reflection, a shadow moved, a dark figure that shouldn't have been there. I turned sharply, but the room behind me was empty. I looked in the mirror again. The dark figure was now closer, almost touching my reflection. With horror, I saw my reflection turn and face the creature. They talked quietly, as if plotting something. Then they both looked directly at me. The reflection smiled, a smile too wide to be human. And it spoke, its voice a distorted echo of mine. "We've finally found you. It's time to change places." From that night on, my life became a nightmare. The reflection in the mirror became stronger, more real. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night to find him watching me, his eyes shining in the darkness. I tried to get rid of the mirror. I covered it with a sheet, but somehow it always reappeared uncovered. I tried to break it, but the hammer slipped out of my hands at the last second. My friends began to notice changes in me. They said I looked different, that my eyes had a strange shine. Little did they know that, little by little, I was losing control. One morning, I woke up and didn't recognize myself in the mirror. The reflection smiled with my face, but the movements were wrong. I raised my hand and the reflection remained still. With growing horror, I realized the truth. It was no longer me who was controlling the reflection. It was controlling me. The days became a confusing blur. I watched helplessly as the reflection lived my life. It went to work on my body, talked to my friends, all while I screamed silently, trapped on the other side of the mirror. I tried to alert people, but no one noticed. The reflection was too good at pretending to be me. Sometimes it would come over to the mirror and talk to me, its voice a cruel parody of mine. "Don't worry," he'd say. "I'll take good care of your life. After all, it's mine now." I watched in horror as he slowly changed things in my life. He cut ties with friends, changed my lifestyle. And all the while, that dark creature was there, always in the corners of my field of vision. I began to understand that it wasn't just the reflection that had escaped. Something else was using my life as a portal to enter our world. I don't know how much time passed. Days, weeks, maybe months. I was weakening, my existence becoming more and more ethereal in the world of the mirror. But then, one night, I saw a chance. The reflection had become careless, too confident in its control. For a brief moment, the barrier between the worlds became thinner. I mustered all the strength I had left and pushed. It was like swimming against a powerful current, every movement an agony. But slowly, painfully, I made it through. I fell to the floor of my room, panting. The reflection screamed with rage in the mirror, banging against the glass. The dark creature emerged fully, its monstrous form finally revealed. I knew I had only seconds before they found a way back. With a cry of despair and fury, I grabbed the nearest lamp and threw it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening sound. I heard agonized screams coming from the shards, briefly seeing distorted faces in each piece before they went out. I collapsed on the floor, exhausted and trembling. I was free, but at what cost? The room was a mess of broken glass and dissipated shadows. Today, years later, I still have nightmares. I still check my reflection twice, dreading seeing that cruel smile. And I always ask myself, did I really win? Or does something from that dark world still live inside me, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Because now I know mirrors are not windows to our soul. They are portals to something much, much worse. It all started with a notification, an invitation to try out a new augmented reality app. I promised myself that it would be the last technological novelty I would download. Little did I know that this decision would change my life forever. The app was called Reality Plus. The interface was simple. You pointed your phone's camera anywhere, and the world took on a new layer of reality. At first, it was just silly games and funny filters. But then, one sleepless night, I discovered a hidden option in the settings: shadow mode. A warning appeared on the screen. Warning: this mode reveals what is hidden. Proceed at your own risk. Curious and a little scared, I activated shadow mode. At first, I didn't notice anything different, until I pointed the camera at the dark corner of my room. There, where there was nothing before, I saw a figure, a dense shadow that seemed to be watching me. When I put my phone down, the corner was empty. But through the screen, the figure was still there, unmoving. My heart raced. Couldn't be real. It was just an app, right? But something told me that I had just opened a door that should never have been opened. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with shadow mode. Everywhere I went, I pointed my phone, anxious and afraid of what I might see. Shadowy figures were everywhere. In the corners of rooms, behind trees in the park, even next to people in the street. Nobody else seemed to notice them. I tried to talk to friends about the app, but when I searched for Reality Plus in the app stores, it had disappeared. It was as if it had never existed. One night, as I was walking home, I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the shadows wasn't standing still. It was moving, following a woman who was walking distractedly. I watched in horror as the shadow came closer and closer. Just as it was about to touch the woman, I shouted a warning. She was startled and stopped abruptly. The shadow passed over her, disappearing into the darkness. The woman looked at me confused and a little frightened before quickly walking away. But I knew what I had seen. The shadows weren't just watching. They were hunting. As the days went by, I realized that the shadows were getting bolder. I no longer had to use the app to see them. They appeared in the corners of my vision, always moving when I tried to look directly.
He started having terrible nightmares.
I dreamt of a world of darkness, where shadows reigned supreme, and with each dream they came closer. Desperate for answers, I spent hours searching online. In obscure forums, I found others who spoke of similar experiences. Many had mysteriously disappeared after their last posts. One user, who identified himself only as Lookout, sent me a private message. They know you can see them now, and they don't like it. Beware, they come after those who know too much. That night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from the living room. I grabbed my cell phone, activated shadow mode, and, with my heart in my mouth, slowly opened the bedroom door. What I saw made me freeze with fear. Dozens of shadows filled the room, all facing in my direction. And then, as one, they began to move towards me. I ran. I left the apartment and fled through the dark streets of the city. But no matter where I went, the shadows followed me. They were in every alley, every corner, every reflection in the windows. Exhausted and terrified, I took refuge in an abandoned church on the outskirts of town. There, surrounded by statues of dusty saints, I tried to catch my breath and think about what to do. Then my cell phone vibrated. A new message from Lookout. The only way to escape is to face them on their own territory. Use the app one last time. Activate portal mode. With trembling fingers, I followed the instructions. The phone screen went completely black, except for a bright spot in the center. I hesitated for a moment, knowing that I was about to cross a point of no return. But hearing the sounds of shadows approaching the church, I realized I had no choice. I touched the bright spot and the world around me dissolved into darkness. I opened my eyes to a place that defied logic. A world of shadows and distorted lights, where gravity seemed optional and time flowed strangely. Shadows were everywhere, but here they had form. Nightmarish creatures that contorted and changed every second. In the center of this chaos, I saw something that looked like a throne made of pure darkness, and on it sat a figure that made my blood run cold. It was me, or rather, a dark version of me. The creature smiled, its voice echoing directly in my mind. "Welcome, intruder. You opened the door, and now there's no going back. Your world will be ours." I then realized what a terrible mistake I had made. The app didn't reveal the shadows. It released them. With a cry of despair and fury, I advanced against my dark doppelganger. I don't know where I got my strength from, but I fought with all my soul. The battle seemed to last an eternity. Reality and nightmare mixed as I faced not only the creature, but my own fears and insecurities that it represented. Finally, with one last desperate blow, I managed to knock the creature off its throne. The shadow world shook and began to shatter. I woke up back in the church, the rising sun streaming in through the broken windows. My cell phone lay in pieces on the floor. Today, years after that night, I still don't know if I really won. The shadows haven't completely disappeared. Sometimes, in the dark corners, I think I see something moving. And I always wonder, did I close the portal in time? Or did I release something that night that is still out there, waiting for the right moment to return and claim our world? Because now I know, there are things hidden in the shadows of our world. And once you see them, they never leave you alone again. I've always been fascinated by horror stories. Movies, books, urban legends, I consumed it all. So when I discovered a new true crime podcast called Whispers from Beyond, I was excited. The podcast was presented by a woman who identified herself only as the medium. Her voice was mesmerizing, and the stories she told were hair-raising. I started listening to the podcast every night before bed. The stories were so vivid that I could almost see the scenes unfolding in my mind. It was in the 10th episode that things started to get strange. The medium was telling the story of a serial killer who could supposedly possess his victims before killing them. Halfway through the episode, her voice changed. It became deeper, more threatening. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. "I know you're listening. Your name. And now you're part of the story." I ripped off my headphones, my heart beating frantically. How did she know my name? It had to be a coincidence, right? But when I looked at my phone, the podcast app had disappeared. And on the screen, reflected in the dark, I saw a face that wasn't mine smiling back at me. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it was just my fertile imagination. But strange things started to happen. I heard whispers when I was alone. Objects moved around when I wasn't looking. And I always had the feeling that I was being watched. Desperate for answers, I started researching the podcast. I couldn't find anything online. It was as if it had never existed, until I received an anonymous email with a single link. It led to an obscure forum where other people were reporting similar experiences with Whispers from Beyond. A user called Survivor27 wrote, "The podcast is a portal. It uses the stories to connect with our world. Each listener is a potential host." I gasped when I read the next sentence. "If you've heard her name, it's too late. She chose you." That night, I woke up to the sound of my own cell phone recording. When I played it back, I heard my voice, but it wasn't my words. "The body is ready. We'll be together soon, my dear listener." The following weeks were a nightmare. I was constantly fighting against a presence that was trying to take control of my body. I had memory lapses, waking up in places without knowing how I got there. Friends said I acted strangely, that sometimes my voice changed. One night, I woke up in the middle of the living room. There were black candles burning in a circle around me. On the walls, strange symbols drawn with something that looked eerily like blood. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I looked in the mirror, I saw her eyes, the medium's eyes, staring back at me. Her voice echoed in my mind, "Don't fight it. You knew what you were getting into when you started listening." Now it's too late to turn back. I realized with horror that she was right. I had invited this into my life, and now I didn't know how to get rid of it. Determined to put an end to it, I ran away from home. I traveled aimlessly, hoping to leave the presence behind. But it always found me. In each city, I heard the podcast playing on random radios. I saw the medium's face in reflections and dreams. Finally, guided by an intuition that didn't seem entirely my own, I arrived in a small town in the middle of nowhere. There, I discovered a store selling esoteric items. The owner, a lady with shrewd eyes, seemed to recognize me as soon as I entered. "You're one of the listeners," she said. It wasn't a question. She told me about the true nature of the medium, an ancient entity that fed on stories and souls. The podcast was her modern bait, a way of finding new victims. "There is a way to banish her," the lady said, "but the price is high. You'll have to face her in her own realm." She gave me an amulet and instructions for a ritual. I warned her that it was dangerous, that I might not come back. But I knew I had no choice. It was either that or be completely consumed. That night, under the full moon, I began the ritual. As I chanted the ancient words, I felt my consciousness detach from my body. The world around me dissolved into shadows and mist. I opened my eyes to a place that defied logic. A world of twisted shadows and distant echoes of screams. In the center of this nightmare, I saw her, the medium. Her form changed constantly, alternating between the beautiful podcast host and something monstrous and ancient. "Welcome to my kingdom," her voice reverberated throughout the place. "You're brave to come here. Foolish, but brave." I gripped the amulet tightly, feeling its power flow through me. "It's over," I shouted. "You're not going to hurt anyone anymore." She laughed, a sound that made my soul tremble. "You humans are so naive. I've existed for millennia. Your stories feed me, your fear strengthens me. Do you really think you can stop me?" What followed was a battle that seemed to last an eternity. I fought not only against her, but against all the souls she had consumed. Every horror story I had ever heard came to life around me. When I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I remembered all the people she had hurt. All the innocent listeners turned into puppets. With a cry from the depths of my soul, I lifted the amulet. A blinding light erupted, tearing through the shadows. I heard the medium scream in pain and fury. The world around us began to crumble. I woke up back in my body, exhausted and shaking. The amulet was reduced to ashes in my hand. In the days that followed, I searched for signs of her. The podcast had completely disappeared. The whispering had stopped. It seemed that I had won. But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear a familiar voice on the wind. And I wonder, have I really beaten it? Or is it out there, looking for a new way to tell its stories? Because now I know, some stories have the power to change reality. And once you're part of them, you can never really escape.